All right, what's going on, my friends? I'm about to go cook up my second meal and then head out into the garage to do my final heavy deadlift session before I compete, not this weekend, but next weekend. Next week will be my deload. I'll get that all recorded and edited for you guys. Hopefully, I will have that up tomorrow, but I figured in the meantime, I could potentially make a fun little video for you today. A lot of that's just because I'm pretty pleased with myself for getting this fancy little webcam, figuring out how to record my screen. Your boy is pretty pleased with himself here. So I figured I would show you guys some of the more impressive front squats through history. Notably more of the heavier ones. There's been plenty of phenomenal lower weight class athletes that have done lifts that are absolutely as impressive as these, but I wanted to show you guys some of the heaviest front squats ever done, just because I think a lot of you might not be familiar with some of these. First, we're going to start with Klokhov's paused 550. Now, plenty of guys have front squatted 550. That's in the territory where a reasonable number of athletes have done it, myself included, but the quality of this lift stands out. That's why it's at 1.8 million views. I know Clarence Kennedy also has a very deep paused 550 front squat, but I'm a Klokhov fanboy, so I figured I would sneak this one in here. He does a passive pause rather than active pause, which I think has a lot of utility for as catching a clean as deep as you can, although I would recommend most of you try to keep your tension in the bottom of your pause if we're training to improve squat strength, rather than passively relaxing onto your ankles at the very bottom. I think you can get a better training effect out of it that way, though I totally understand why he does them this way for his given sport. Just a wicked feat of strength. Cool lift by one of my favorite lifters. I probably could have included, I believe, Tien Tao has done a 280 kilo front squat. That is just gorgeous. Zero breakdown whatsoever. Should have included that. That's one of my favorites. But here we have the GOAT, Ilia doing a very, very easy 290 kilo front squat. Absolutely could have done more, but didn't, right? And that brings us to an interesting topic of discussion here, which is if you're really familiar with weightlifting, you already know the answer to what I'm about to tell you. But most of the heaviest front squats ever done have been done by powerlifters using them as a kind of a max effort variation in the hopes of it carrying over to their competition style squat, or by strongmen using it as a general strength exercise. A lot of people would be confused by that. They say, well, front squat, that's what weightlifters do. Why aren't the heaviest front squats ever done by weightlifters? And that's because in most training systems, the primary driver of leg strength is the back squat, and the front squat is more something that just needs to be good enough. It's part of the clean, right? It's very directly relevant to our ability to stand up a clean. Once we can front squat with relative ease a certain amount in excess, and from country to country, what's determined as enough excess might vary, but once we can go north of what we can clean by enough, we just need to drop to maintenance, and we can free that training economy up to work on other weaknesses in general strength. Or if our general strength is already quite high, it just means more specific training volume for the clean and jerk and the snatch. So that's why you won't see too many weightlifters pushing above about 280 to 290 kilos for relatively easy reps. Could they do more? Absolutely, but why would they? You see the same thing with the back squat. Most really successful super heavyweight weightlifters won't really push above 800 at the most, but a lot of the time you're just seeing really fast rocket ship type reps in the low sevens like Lasha. Could Lasha push that further? Absolutely. You could squat max like someone like Mart Syme, who really pushed the squat maybe past its logical end all the way up to a high bar Olympic style 880, one of the great feats of strength of all time, but he's still getting waxed by Lasha. So instead, if you say, okay, well, I've got this system in my country, I determine that, okay, if I can back squat this and I can front squat this, my general strength is good enough. That means I've got more training I can dedicate to the actual comp specific lifts because my general strength is already up there. So 280, 290 is usually where we see guys will top out pushing their front squats, though they could push them further. Though you have some absolute stud strength enthusiasts, like my favorite weightlifter, Tank Murakami, who just wanted to see if he could do it anyway. That guy maybe pushes things past their logical conclusion because he's a fucking Chad. Is his training maybe slightly under-specific? Maybe, but that's what makes him a fucking Chad. I love this guy. This rep counts. He stood all the way up. Absolutely fucking counts. Couple other weightlifters have pushed to that 300 kilo margin, though that list is very short because partially why. But it's a pretty short list. And I think the Sika guys were discussing 300 kilos being maybe the heaviest front squat that's ever been done from a front rack, especially from like a full grip front rack by a weightlifter. And then past that, we're mostly looking at guys who are training for powerlifting and strongman. Though I do know of one heavier that we'll get to in a moment. Next, we have a relatively unknown powerlifter. He's got 82 subscribers named Adam Ward. I was digging through the depths of YouTube and I found a man that front squats 7 plates. That is very, very rare air. Very few people through history have done that. In the 500s, it's a pretty reasonable number of people who've gotten there. 600s becomes pretty rare. When we start getting up towards 660, 675, we start getting into a very, very small group of men that have pushed this lift this far. We're going to talk about later, partially that's because it's not a competitive lift. And if it was a competitive lift, there would be a bigger gene pool and more people would have done it. But I just wanted to highlight this guy. Just a crazy lift, pretty sick, deserves some credit. And next we have Max's rival, my brother's rival. I believe he beat Max out for the heaviest total done below the age of 20. Here he is a goddamn 17-year-old front squatting 7 plates. I think later in his training career, he might have done a triple at 675, but I can't find it. But just ungodly strong, very unreasonable, amazing squatter, great lifter. Seems like a really good guy too. But wicked lift. Again, being in that territory of things very few men have done, doing it at the age of 17 is gnarly. Which brings us to my knowledge, the heaviest front squat done from a front rack and the heaviest front squat done by a weightlifter, to my knowledge. I mean, maybe technically you could say, I think Jezza might have started in weightlifting. I genuinely don't know. But as far as like people that were competitive weightlifters to a high level, I believe this is the heaviest ever with Misha Koklyaev at 687. I saw the Sika guys talking about that 300 kilos, and I was like digging back, and I was like, I could have sworn when I started lifting, I was binge watching Misha content, and Misha has pushed past that 300 kilos. And I went and I found it, and he's done 687 from a front rack. The guys that just being this big and strong and preserving your front rack is a feat in itself. Being this absolute unit of a man and still being able to do a full grip front rack is gnarly in itself. Trust me, try to preserve your front rack if you have any goals that require a front rack. It is a lot easier to keep it than it is to get it back. We all start a little bit skinny and we're like, oh, what's the big fuss? Absolutely I can front rack. And then you don't use it for quite a while. You do a lot of pressing and you lose it, and getting it back is a bitch. The easiest thing you can do to preserve that is just work on front squats from a full grip if you can every week. They don't even have to be super heavy, and you'll be able to preserve that quality so that way you don't have to get it back if your goals pertain to that. If you're a power lifter, I really don't think you need to put too much thought into preserving your front rack, but if you have other goals as far as putting really heavy stuff over your head or doing really heavy front squats, a front rack is the superior technique. Now, the heaviest front squats of all time are all done with a cross grip, but that's not because it's the superior technique. It's because these are such massive men that they cannot front rack. If they could, they would. It is the better technique if able to do both. So I would just put that out there. Which brings us to this video of a young, skinny Jezza Uepa who, spoiler alert, he will reappear later in this video because Jezza Uepa has the heaviest front squat ever done by a country mile. But I really like this video of when he was a little bit lighter. The depth is great. This video stuck with me. It's just a really, really impressive lift. Walked out. Just a sick lift that I wanted to show you guys, even if he's kind of getting double featured within this video. Also, I'm going to go on a slight rant before we move on to the next one. So a while ago, Dr. Mike made a video talking about why he didn't think front squats were like the best use of training economy for bodybuilding. And that's fair. I think that maybe it's overstated slightly. Most people don't have such heavily trained quads that their training needs to be optimal. Most people could see some pretty good gains from pushing front squats. But that being said, in most gyms, there's probably better choices if we're trying to be maximally effective in hypertrophying our quads. I don't necessarily actually disagree. I know GVS was like highlighting like, hey, just because something isn't like hypothetically optimal doesn't mean it doesn't work damn well. And I think you need to communicate that. I was like, that's a good point. Fair enough. But whatever. I don't actually disagree with Dr. Mike too much on this. And then I saw a reel. I think Alec Onkiri shared the reel of a clip from that video where he said front squats were a bad use of time for strongmen. And that is one of the most like head in ass. I know this is the new controversial fucking Dr. Mike, and he's like saying stuff to drive, but that is just showing that you know nothing about what you're talking about. Yes, you have a degree in preparing athletes for competition, but you clearly are not very in touch with what is done in strongmen. In every weight class other than the super heavyweights, the vast majority of athletes make use of front squats a big portion of the year because they're a phenomenal general strength exercise for dealing with heavy loads in front of your body, which we do a lot in strongmen. They're a great motion to help stones. They're a great motion to help over heavy like log presses and axle presses. They're a great motion to help heavy front carries. they're a phenomenal exercise. And some guys got into the comments and said, well, then why don't the strongest guys do it? Well, because the strongest guys are big and a little bit immobile, so some of them shy away from it. But even in the super heavyweight class, JF Caron made regular use of front squats year round. Martins Lisis did tons of front squats in the offseason. Kevin Ferris, Matusz Kilishkovsky, Trey Mitchell, all of these guys make regular use of front squats. To say it's not a good exercise for strongman is crayon eating dumb. Man, that one wound me up. I was surprised he said that, because if it was staying at bodybuilding, I was totally game to agree. But that brings me to this one, which is a real shame. You might recognize this guy, Lucas Caldos, from being featured on the Sika News. He's deleted all his posts, but this guy is 275 pounds, shredded, and has one of the heaviest front squats ever. He did, I believe, 740 pounds with abs, diced up, one of the crazier feats of strength, and he deleted it. I don't think his videos are on YouTube, so that's a crying shame. But this guy's a fucking freak, so I figured I would show you. And I guess that brings us to my knowledge, the 3 heaviest front squats ever done. Again, there might be guys who didn't do it on video, there's some claims that are dubious in sports, like there's shot putters that claim they behind the neck pressed 500. I don't know if that happened. I mean strict press, by the way. So usually I work off of videos. But that being said, there's plenty of guys who did crazy feats of strength that weren't on video. But as far as is able to be confirmed, I believe Warwick Brandt was the first man to front squat 800. Here we have 780, but on his Instagram, there is a video of him doing 800 pounds. Warwick Brandt is a world's strongest man competitor who used to represent Australia in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. And this is a feat of, like, again, strongmen use this as a general strength exercise that does damn well at what it does. It's a general squat pattern movement where the load is offset in front of us, so we get a lot of those trunk benefits as well as the leg benefits that we get from front squatting. It makes a ton of sense. This is the kind of feat of strength you'd expect from a world's strongest man, a little bit shorter, a little bit stockier guy, really squatty. This is the kind of feat of strength you'd expect. But only 3 guys ever have done it, right? Crazy lift, very, very underappreciated. I did not even know about this. I thought there were only 2 men above 800 until I was really, really digging deep to research. Which brings us to, I believe, the second man to ever front squat 800 pounds. And he's done it twice, once at 800, once at the 825 we're looking at here. Former training partner of Eric Lillybridge, powerlifter Derek Kendall. Dude was an absolute freak, loved just training for heavy reps. I think he ended up deciding he didn't like training for heavy singles, he didn't like powerlifting, and he just liked doing like heavy rep sets that he called bodybuilding training. And he also burnt out on social media and disappeared. So somewhere in a gym in the Midwest, there might just be Derek Kendall doing some of the freakiest sets of all time, like 405 for 15 on seated military press and 635 pounds for 12 on front squats. Or this. I don't care if the spotter's hands are on the bar. This is a disgusting lift. Dunked it. Crazy lift. One of the only men to go north of 800 pounds. But that brings us to the king. The man who is winning this race by a lot. He is 70 pounds ahead of the second heaviest front squat ever done, and that is 1,000-pound meat squatter powerlifter Jezza Uepa from Nauru. Insane lift, right? When we talk about like, hey, he's this far ahead of the pack, it very much matters how big that pack is. If something is a competitive lift and there's more people contesting it, being that far ahead of the pack is more impressive than being equally far ahead of a niche non-competitive lift. Now, that's not to say that a Zurcher PR isn't crazy impressive. And I saw someone post like, man, frickin', what's his name? Andrew Richards is like 10% above the second strongest strict presser in the world. Who else has that like margin of a lead? Well, I mean, John Hack does in powerlifting damn near in terms of his total. But aside from that, right, it matters if it's contested, because actually when the strict press was a competitive lift and was being contested, there were guys doing 500 pounds strict with layback from the floor, which is a lot harder than doing it from the rack to a full lockout, which I love Andrew Richards, but I don't know if that's a full lockout. So he's not 10% ahead of all time, right? So that same, I have to keep that in mind and say the same thing about Jezza here. This isn't a competitive lift, and there would be people closer, if not winning, if it was a competitive lift, though he could have pushed this further. But to me, in terms of just how hard it is to wrap my head around this as a feat of strength, in terms of squatting, this is maybe second only to Ray Williams' 1,080. I just don't understand this. One of the craziest lifts ever done. This one's relatively known, but some of those other ones, if you haven't seen them before, let me know. If you guys know of anybody, especially north of 700, that I did not include, I'm very, very curious to learn about them because I like keeping a mental tally of like some of these lifts that aren't competitive and you can't just look up on Open Powerlifting. I pride myself in knowing some of these lifts through history. If you know of any, especially if they're on video, let me know. And if you know of a heavier front squat done from a front rack, very much let me know. I'm very curious if that Misha front squat is the most or if someone has done more. You could let me know if there's a report of one. Obviously, there's been great super heavyweight weightlifters through history that were kind of pre-recording training who report some pretty crazy training maxes, some of which I believe, some of which I don't. But especially if you've got a video, please let me know. If you made it this far, leave a like. I appreciate you boys for watching my videos. It means a lot to me. Thank you. Oh, also, before I go, if you have something similar to this, like you want me to compile some of the higher results in something else, anything like that, any of these my face on a screen videos, you got ideas? I'm all ears.